All right, and we are live. Welcome back
Woo-hoo.
to a very special edition of How We Would Build This. Uh, with me today is longtime friend of Flatstack, longtime friend of mine, partner in Flatstack. He's now a VC, has been investing for the next stage of his career. Peter Bodenheimer, welcome, Peter.
Thank you. And I would say reformed VC at this point, perhaps. Although
He
we'll see.
went
We'll see.
VC and now he's
Um, now it's great to be here, and I've
now he's
watched a
back.
couple
See,
of
well,
these,
welcome,
and
Peter.
thanks. And it's been fun. I've watched a couple of these, so I'm psyched to get on here and catch up with you, which it's been a little while, and B, talk about some of the things that I've learned, and how I have built things, how I would build things, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, we've got lots of material, I'm sure between us today. Um, so you can probably guess that the title of the show, "How We Would Build This," is sort of the preface to people wanting to get on Guy Raz's show, "How I Did Build This," how I
Right.
built this. So you start on this show, and then you go on this tons of
That's
success
right.
based on the advice we give you here on this show, and then you end up on Guy Raz's show. Um,
Exactly. Love it.
well, we've done a fun thing, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. But when Ryan and I have done the show together, he'll often ask a guest, just as a starting point to jump in, tell us a story. Any good stories in the archive you think that would that you want to start with?
Yep. I'll tell a great story. I think this will go back. This is flat stack related. And it'll go back to one of our early trips, or one of my early trips over to meet with the team, and sort of the I'm trying to think of the details here. You are putting me on the spot. There was actually, it wasn't that early. It was a couple of years in, and we were over visiting the team in Kazan, and we always used to fly in and out of Moscow on the way because, as one can imagine, there's not a massive number of international flights directly into Kazan, Russia. There are way more now than there were back in the day. Um, but we had an overnighter in Moscow on the way back, and this was around the time that I was working on bar notes and had become a full-on cocktail nerd, and had been introduced to the owner of some cocktail bars in Moscow. And you and I said, you know what, this would be fun. Let's go see what a like a high-end Moscow cocktail bar is like. And so we get to the door of the place, and I remember they absolutely 100% had no interest in letting us in because we were wearing tennis shoes, or trainers,
Or
as they referred
trainers?
to them.
Yeah.
And they thought we were full of shit when we said, "Oh, no, we know the owner." And now I'm even blanking on his name. You may remember it. Shoot. Well, anyway, so we dropped the name. They went and checked. The very large, burly Russian bouncers giving us the look of, "You guys are so full of it. There's no way you know anybody." And lo and behold, they let us in. Uh, the owner and his wife end up dropping by. Amazing bar, such good drinks, and they said, "Well, why don't you come out with us?" And we ended up at some private club on an island in the middle of the Volga River, and then had to rush back to the hotel to grab our bags after not getting any sleep, to head straight to the airport to fly back to the US. So that's a memorable evening in Russia. Not necessarily pure business related, but it was one of my more it was an experience I'll never forget. That's for sure.
I mean, that's how you catch a flight, right? Up all night in the cocktail bars and racing to the plane, right?
I mean, some of the best sleep I've ever had on a flight home from anywhere. So, um, And actually, I remember a little tidbit to that, which was when we got to the airport, both extremely exhausted and trying to keep our eyes open. And they accidentally printed me out a first class ticket. And I elbowed you in the side as hard as I could, like, don't say anything. And then, of course, they recognized that they had screwed up and ripped up the boarding pass in front of me and gave me my regular coach ticket.
It almost made your day on the way back.
Although I wouldn't have enjoyed it because I would have been asleep one way or the other the whole flight
Right,
back. So
right. Well, we had a lot of fun over the years, going back and forth to the office in Kazan, and I haven't been in 3 years. It's been a little while, and obviously COVID isn't helping. So
yeah.
I guess
Well,
thank
it
goodness for
was
Zoom at this
important.
point.
I think it was really important to us growing the business together because there's so much you can do remotely. And I think we've all found that out over the last 18 months. Even people that never had any remote aspect to their work figured out, okay, there's a way to work where you're a distributed team, you're remote, but there is nothing quite like breaking bread with people. We used to talk about our hard talks where we would have
Hmm.
things as an ownership or a partnership that we didn't always agree on. And that's natural in every single business, right? In every relationship. And it's a lot different to talk about those things over video chat than it is to sit down, eat some food, hash things out. We always, it was sort of that centering, bring everything back to baseline moments, and they were so important. And it's been tough because I think for everybody, with international travel being such a big part of how we ran Flatstack, and I'm sure you still do, and where the inability we've had over the last 18 months to really make those in-person connections, not just internationally, but even you know across the country or across state lines.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, you and I haven't seen each other in a while. It's been a while. The way I describe it, and Ann and I talk about it, is um, I think that you can maintain relationships over Zoom. We can kind of pick up where we left off when we hop on a screen like this. But it's hard to build relationships. So that sort of nurturing, like you said, the breaking bread, the informality and sort of relationship building, team building. I think in an ideal world, if and when we can get back to it, um, it would be great to be able to see people on a quarterly basis, and then maintain those relationships on Zoom, and give. I love the flexibility. It's like the world is coming around to where we already were in terms of not having to go in an office every day. The whole Launchpad and Flatstack kind of thesis business model. The world has definitely moved that direction, but you still do want to see people in person every once in a while.
That's it. I think when in my last role working with SOSV, we always had a somewhat distributed nature to what we did. But if you remember, in the second quarter of 2020, new investment dollars into startups just dropped through the floor because all of the investors that I knew, we were different in the sense that we were an accelerator. We were taking applicants. We were doing interviews with companies around the globe. So we were doing a lot of this over Zoom already. But most investors don't write a check until they spend time with a founder or a founding team over a period of time. And so
Right.
everybody had to say, well, how do we write a check? And it's one thing if you're writing a small seed or pre-seed check of $100,000 or something like that, or even as an angel writing a $25,000 check into an entrepreneur that you have some prior relationship with. But when you're saying, okay, we're going to lead an $11 million Series A, so we're writing a $5 million or $6 million check into a company, oh, by the way, we've never met the founding team of that company. That's a tough position to be in, because you've got a fiscal responsibility to your LPs as an investor. Everybody's answering to somebody. And
Right.
if that investment doesn't work out and your LPs go, wait, you wrote a how many $1 million check into a company you'd never met? It really turned the world upside down for a little while. But I think, to your point, people have gotten to a comfort level, and it may take a little bit longer now for people to get there, but they can do it. It just still isn't that substitute. And I know every investor that I'm close with is now trying to get back to in-person meetings where they can, because you just get a better sense of people and their passion for something. I know it can come across over video like this, but not quite in the same way as sitting and having a coffee or a beer or a cocktail or a plate of food with somebody.
We still refer in Flatstack to the old Peter Bodenheimer gut feel, the gut feel.
I know
that kind of
that's the story
requires in person, right, to have that gut feel.
Well, you know what? I'd say it's better in person. It's that gut feel is certainly more accurate when you get in person.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had plenty of video calls with prospective investees or applicants to FoodX where it didn't take me long for my gut feel, generally on the negative side, to make itself known.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about. I'm interested in bringing in all of your experience as a builder. You built products. You've invested in companies. We ran an accelerator program together.
We've invested together.
We've invested together. Even had some exits together. So. Incorporating all of that, and what advice would you have for founders, at an early stage, folks who are, let's say they have more than an idea for a product, but they have a prototype, or they're working on a prototype. We often see folks with Flatstack that, there's always the tension. You want to build better software. You want to continue your product development, but you need money to do it, right? So there's a chicken and the egg, but I need a prototype to go out and raise funding or get in an accelerator program. What's your advice for how to sort of navigate that at the early stages?
Well, it's tough. I mean, it depends on your skill set, right? And so if you're capable of building something, and certainly in the tech space, there's so many frameworks and no code options out there that building something, is better than building something that's crappy is better than having nothing at all. Now, if your skill set is not in building something, but is in sales or marketing, then go about the process of building out a great brand deck or a great go-to-market strategy, or not even great, like building something. I think there was a sticker I used to have that I loved, and I need to find another one, fuck it, ship it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't ship something, it's hard for people to want to get behind it. And so that doesn't always have to mean you build the product or an MVP or a prototype. It could be, a clickable mock-up. It could be wireframes. That's not optimal, certainly. The more real it is, the better. But if your skill is not in building something, go find a partner. And one of the questions that we talked about just briefly before, in that 2 minutes before we went live, was, do you need to own your technology? And I think it's an easy brush off to say, oh, well, you don't own your technology. You're not building it yourself. You don't have a whole team in house.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do in today's world. You're competing with massive companies that can pay big dollars to the best engineers. And more and more, they don't care where they are. So they're plucking talent from secondary and tertiary markets to work for Netflix or Facebook or Google. And that makes it that much tougher to get somebody in-house who's going to build it. So partnering up with somebody, I think the way that I look at it, or the way that I've talked about it, and this is very much based on my experience working with companies at Flatstack, was, are you in a position where you're beholden to somebody and you can't, there's no portability in what you've built? So they're using a proprietary framework that they built and only they can work on. That's bad. But if it's something where, listen, if I outgrow this team, I can hire on, I can build, a new version, I can take what we've built and modify it or migrate it over. That's not that is no longer, a deal breaker from my perspective. Now, again, think about the size of checks we were writing at SOSV. It was about $125,000 at that earliest stage. So we had a little more tolerance for risk, but I think it's unrealistic to assume that every company that approaches you is going to have a CTO, a VP of engineering, and a team of developers in-house building a product at this point.
Right. Certainly at the early stages. What about the co-founder versus contractor, or versus, it doesn't even have to be a company. It could just be a freelancer, right? But I feel like there's for a while, the zeitgeist in accelerator programs was you got to have 2 or 3 co-founders, right? And so even with Launchpad, as we were doing it, a lot of people, got married, right? You partner up, you literally, partner up in your organizational documents, before as you're getting to know people, you're much more in the, hey, we're just dating phase, but because of the constraints that accelerator programs have, they're forcing you to get married. There's that. On one hand, you check the box with multiple co-founders. On the other hand, you've given up a heck of a lot more than a freelancer or a contractor that you can just fire and you own 100% of it again if it's not working out.
Well, and we've seen one of the companies that was in Launchpad Ignition who had an early technical co-founder type partner who screwed him and really was the reason the business failed ultimately, because it was a good concept. The 2 co-founders have gone on to have success in other areas. They were very young and they trusted somebody they shouldn't. And that happens more often than one would think when, unsophisticated founders just tap into their local network and don't do research and don't go out and find. The world is small now. So it doesn't matter where somebody is. It doesn't matter how you find them. You find the right partner. And so ultimately on the co-founder thing, the question is, or one way of looking at it is, what's the number one reason startups fail? Co-founder issues.
Yep.
And so forcing teams together just to meet some criteria was always something I didn't care for. And at FoodX, we invested in a handful of solo founders, even though I used to fight that battle all the time. There were some people in the organization, very smart, very capable, very experienced people who believe that you should never invest in a solo founder. But I can point to more than a handful of solo founders that I think have been exceptional and have had real success. And it matters less, in my opinion, whether it's a solo founder or a team. There's no question that in a startup, especially in the earliest days of a startup, there's more to do than you have time and resources to do. So being on your own is really fucking hard. But if you're a solo founder, but you've got the right people around you, that's a different story, in my opinion. And that's where we started to evaluate towards the end of my time at SOSV. We would look at solo founders and we wouldn't discount them because of that, but we were very specifically trying to figure out if they were a solo founder because they were a control freak and they couldn't hand over things and delegate, or if they were the kind of solo founder that had a strong vision, was able to attract talent and people around them that could help lighten that load, even if they weren't a quote unquote co-founder. Maybe they held 5% of the equity in the company or even 3%
Right.
or something like that. They weren't I think we defined a co-founder as somebody that held more than 20% of the equity at the earliest stage. That matters less than if they're bought in. And of course, caveat, these are my opinions. There are plenty of investors out there that say, nope, if you're not a team that includes a technical co-founder and a business co-founder, or in the life sciences, you have the right scientific co-founders, then they won't invest. But I think it matters, you have to evaluate every company as its own thing, not just pattern matching and the things that get you to invest in people that look just like somebody else. There's no way that you're going to end up reflecting the audience of people that use products if you only invest in people that look like founders who've been successful in the past.
Yep. Yep. So sticking on, because I know that you have certainly through FoodX, experience in investing in broader than where you mentioned life sciences, food and food technologies themselves, but sticking on sort of software and sort of products, in the software space. Do you feel like are we getting to a point where everything's been done, or do you feel like there's still a huge amount of opportunity? Obviously there's huge pros to building software with the gross margins and scalability, and but it's also getting easier and easier and easier, which means there's no barriers to entry. It's super competitive and it's noisy. There's just tons of stuff out there. Not to mention, I don't know, maybe we all have a little bit of app overload. I don't know if we're as enthusiastic about some technology as we used to be. What's your current kind of feeling on things?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's no doubt that there is a lot of Me Too products out there, or what I used to jokingly refer to as 6-minute abs, like something about Mary. It's like, oh well, instead of 9 grams of protein, this bar has 10 grams of protein. Like, who gives a shit? Or hey, this software does this, but we do it 1 second faster. Like, maybe in certain circumstances, 1 second faster matters a lot, but more often than not in consumer products, not so much. That said, I think there's always room. There is always space for innovation, and the stuff that we think is silly, not to say we're getting old, but we're getting a little bit older. We may not get it, and we may look at it and say, well, this isn't really that important, or this isn't a serious business, but it turns into one. And so I think the challenge right now is there's a lot of venture capital money out there. There's a lot of money that typically is fighting for the same deals, so valuations go crazy, and you end up with sort of this bifurcation of founders where they're teams that are beating off investors and naming their own terms, that everybody's fighting to get into that deal because there is investors act like they're always, contradictory, but they aren't. They're not always looking to make the bet that nobody else is. A lot of investors want to be in on the deal that everybody else is because it gives them cover to some extent.
Right.
And then you end up with founders that have really viable businesses that are struggling to get people into their deal, even though the valuations are very fair. And that's the nature of venture some days. But I think part of it is that it is so easy to start something that there are, unfortunately, a lot of companies out there that are looking for funding from the venture space that are simply not venture appropriate. Now, that is
Right.
definitely less the case in software, because scaling a company when you're moving bits versus atoms, atoms are a lot harder. I was talking with a founder of a food CPG, a consumer goods company that's selling a food product. And to scale that up is a lot of work because you're moving products from one geography to another. You've got to get on shelves in retailers or capture their eyeballs on direct to consumer websites, or you got to give up your 30% to Amazon and have them potentially copy you and all those things. In software, it's not as hard as that, but it's harder in other ways because you've got to still go out. I mean, the biggest problem I've seen with good products not being able to break through is that, CAC to LTV ratio. It costs them too much to go get a new customer, and then they can't hold on to them, whether it's through churn or a new, better product coming out that steals their thunder. Or, I mean, I think Clubhouse is an interesting example, right? Like, at the end of the day, Clubhouse, is it a product or is it a feature?
Yeah.
And that's something we used to talk about a lot when we would evaluate ideas that we came up with or prospective customers we were talking to. Is this something that stands on its own as a business? And if it's not, it's just going to be easy for one of the big boys to knock off.
I still see at the bottom of a bunch of emails the little smiley face or frowny face, which Nico was. I think that's a clear example of interesting idea for UI, and definitely anybody could incorporate it as a feature. So yeah, it's more of a feature than a company.
It's tough in that regard because you see something that is missing in the market. And I think builders by their nature want to go solve that problem. And so they build something. And then they build something, it gets some early traction, people get excited about it, and they're like, okay, there's a business here. Let's go raise some capital. Let's go grow this thing. It's going to be the next big thing. And sometimes it could be, but more often than not, it may not be solving a big enough problem, or it may not be solving it in a way that's differentiated enough or protectable enough that there's a real scaled business behind it.
Yep. Well, I have a tough time, and maybe it's you said we're getting older. I have a tough time keeping up with consumer. It's always been hard to think about consumer products from an investment standpoint. You hear a lot of people with ideas, but it's very clubby, the world of consumer. To be able to walk in Andreessen Horowitz and get a $200 million check. That's sort of where the winners come from in consumer. So putting consumer aside for a second, I think you're certainly one of the originators of this thinking with Flatstack, and and are looking for unsexy businesses, traditional industries that are becoming tech enabled. So here's my question. Mark Andreessen's old adage, software is eating the world. How much of the world do you think software has eaten at this point, and how much remains? Because those I think are really interesting sectors. Things that have not really been disrupted, but are still kind of huge industries.
Yeah, well, I'll give an example or two from the SOSV FoodX days, we started to really look at companies that were B2B way more than consumer products, because while the sales cycles are longer and harder, if you're in an accelerator program where they are plugging you in with a retailer or uh, an enterprise customer that might be an LP in a fund or might have a relationship with that program, you're going to cut a lot of time off of that. And the upside of that is huge in terms of sales. But at the same time, that's the place where things are probably being done the same in a lot of ways. So we looked at supply chain, for example, was a place that we thought there is so much innovation. And I think COVID showed this to the world, that supply chains are not particularly robust and resilient. And we're even still seeing shortages now in products because of supply chain hiccups. And that's not just a lack of raw materials, it's how sophisticated is the software that is running the supply chain for, some of these food and beverage companies or for some of the retailers. Now, they're getting there for sure. In fact, a lot of them have developed their own skunk workses, or skunk works operations to help build things that they need. But there's still a lot of room in that side of the industry. And then looking at specific sectors of industries where they are more old school, they are more obfuscated from disruption because they've been, any place where there are a lot of middlemen is where there's still room to innovate, to disrupt, to build efficiencies. And sometimes, it's harder than others, but I think when you look at a company I really liked that was not a company I invested in, it was just not at the right stage for us when I met them, but a company called Pod Foods out of San Francisco that was founded by two women who had a consumer company, and they got screwed by some of the distributors that were doing natural channel distribution because they are such old school businesses. And so they decided, well, maybe it's not making this food product that we care about. Maybe it's building a solution for people like us that are tired of getting, their teeth kicked in by these middlemen who just lean on us and take every penny that we make from the product. And so they've built this product and they have had some really good success with it. I think there's also, an interesting part of going after a consumer market in a business is sometimes you try and build a consumer product and realize that that's not the easiest path to success. But what you're building during that time trying to get to the consumer is what ends up being a really great B2B product. So there's a company called Halla, Halla, that is in the recommendations business. So they work with retailers to do for online grocery and online shopping, either replacement. So they're out of this product. What else would you like? And it used to be that you would, put bagels in your cart and they would recommend that you might want to also put in toilet paper and bananas because those are the two most frequently purchased products in grocery. And so in terms of frequency, that's what they think goes together. When in fact, really what you want is probably cream cheese, or if you're plant-based, you want a vegan cream or a tofu cream cheese, And so they realized what they had originally built was something for trying to get groups to go out and find places to eat because of different dietary restrictions. I mean, talk about a niche product there. But they realized there was no business there, but they built some kick-ass technology while doing that. And then as they started to understand the market, they realized there's a much bigger opportunity in the enterprise and B2B space, and that's where they are today and have had a lot of success.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of, you build a core function functionality that maybe it is more of a feature than a company, but then you go sell it as a feature and integration, and power, other websites, right?
Well, and in that case, it's because the technology is so complex and specialized
Yeah.
that it is a feature in some way, but it's not a feature that anyone can just add. Like,
But for
you know,
for their customer base now, it's when they approach the buy versus build decision, it makes more sense to buy it
yeah,
and integrate it that way. Yeah.
yeah. And I'll say I've been seen it up close where they had one of the very big retailers said, we're going to compare it to ours. We've been building our own in-house. And they actually had the retailer's team had all of the data,
Huh.
whereas the Hala team had a subset of data and still outperformed theirs. So, that's a case where, it is a feature, but because they do it so much better, and that's a case where doing it a second faster actually makes a huge difference in the customer experience. So if they
Right.
can do it, faster and better, then they're in the game, as opposed to, oh, well, we'll just build this and it'll be just as good.
Yep. All right, so let's talk a little bit about staying on sort of early stage, but you've got a prototype now, and you're looking to kind of take it to the next stage. And I'm thinking specifically of we have a Flatstack client who's here right now. Flatstack has sort of built the prototype. And I want to hear your thinking around accelerator programs, the value of accelerator programs, what to apply to, and I'm thinking specifically about. All right, so we both have obviously our New Orleans experience and running, Launchpad there, and there's other accelerator programs in New Orleans. So one option is you apply to an accelerator program where you live, and you can go there and you go to that accelerator program. I'm interested if you have comments on some provide funding, some don't, that kind of thing. The other option is another option is you go to the best, right? You go to the, or you try to get into the Harvard or the Stanford or the YC or, the Techstars, or I don't know, there's a lot of Techstars now, so I don't think you can just throw around Techstars anymore. But another option would be a sector specific. So I'm building it in this sector, and that's what you did with FoodX. If I'm in the food space, might as well go to this very sector focus, because then at least I know the connections, the network, and the people running the program are focused on the industry that I'm actually trying to build a company in. Out of all of those sort of options, or what guidance would you have, for somebody sort of looking around for an accelerator program, and where to take their working prototype that they want to take to the next level?
So you probably won't find this hugely surprising, but I'll say, why are you going? And if you're looking at an accelerator program because you need money, don't, because typically the terms are less beneficial to the founding team because of the added value or the perceived added value that the accelerator provides. There are definitely strata of programs out there. YC to me doesn't carry the weight that it used to, because their classes are now so large that being the stamp of a YC company means less than it did 5 years ago or 7 years ago. Techstars, I think, still runs great programs in their core accelerators, but then their corporate partnership accelerators, some are very good, some are not as good. And so it's a little bit hit or miss, but if it's Techstars Boulder or Techstars New York or Techstars Berlin or one of their core Techstars programs, they're very, very good in my opinion. I think the SOSV programs are very good, but I'm obviously a little bit biased there, and those are all vertical specific. So I think the recommendation I would have is for a founder or a founding team to think about what is it that I want out of this experience. If it's I need money, I really hesitate because you're going to give up more than and no matter how much people promise that you come to the accelerator and you're going to get funded, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
The best companies get funded. You're going to get introductions. You're going to get doors opened up, and but it's your job. One of the things we used to say in orientation was, "We'll open a door. We'll make an introduction, but it's your job to close the deal. We're not here to take responsibility for your success as a founder." Now, the best teams and the ones that generally felt like they got the most out of the program had a clear vision of what they wanted. And that often was, I want to get introduced to these 5 big corporates that I have no access to. I want to meet, you know, experts in these areas that I know very little about, and I need to understand those areas in order for this company to get to the next level. Or I need to be and actually, I think one of the most underappreciated parts of programs that run cohorts as opposed to continuous intake programs that take companies in 1 or 2 at a time over an annual pace is it's nice to be going through this process with other people. Even if you've got co-founders, startups can be a very lonely place. And some days you feel like you're drowning. And if you're with a group of people that are going through that same experience, or even in a better case, where over time they've built a little bit of a track record and they have a space where there may be companies that went through the program 2 years ago, sharing space and co-locating with the newest companies. All of a sudden, I remember one story in particular where there was a company that had gone through one of our sister programs who was sitting in the food tech space, and they closed a round of about $2.5 million. And all of these companies that were maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the FoodX program were so like, wow, we've gotten to know these people. It demystified the whole fundraising process. They were like, wait, I know them. They're just like me. If they can do it, I can do it. And there's a real power to that. But at the end of the day, when you are applying to programs, I think you want to focus on the more reputable, the higher tier programs. It doesn't take a lot to set up an accelerator. And if you go in to one without much of a track record or that doesn't have a lot of resources or a lot of reach in their network, you can end up with a pretty disappointing experience. I would go back to the gut feel thing, which is, founders have to have some EQ. And if you feel good about a program, then pursue it with everything you got. And if you feel like they're pursuing you and you're not sure if they're the right people for you, trust your instincts and find another one.
Yep. Okay. Good advice there. I mean, I think that's right. I think one of the things that that applies to all range of decisions as a founder. Nobody else is going to do it for you, right? And nobody else there is no roadmap. There certainly are traditional steps along the way that a lot of people follow on a certainly in a venture scaling company. But there's nobody that's going to do it for you, and so you kind of have to know what you want out of it and go for it, right?
And don't be afraid. I see this with founders or entrepreneurs far too often, where they feel like there's this power dynamic where they can't ask an investor or an accelerator operator hard questions.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great signal when somebody asks those hard questions and comes back and says, well, I think this is really interesting, but tell me, here's my company. What do you think what would make you excited about having us in your program? Like, make them sell you as much as you're selling them, because that is part of the dynamic. And this is a little bit of, opening the kimono, but I always found that during the interview process, everybody was trying to sell us. As soon as we made an offer, that dynamic flipped and we were selling them. And, it has to be a two-way street, because if one person is getting all of the value and getting all of the information, then ultimately it's not going to be as successful as you want it to be.
And keeping in mind that any of these steps along the way are just that, and they always reset the goalpost. It was, I remember, like getting into an accelerator program, we had Nico as an example, getting in the angel pad, and you think, okay, great, it's launched, we're off and running. But it's always just a reset of the goalposts. And the same thing, you get in the accelerator program, then you raise your seed round, then you raise your Series A, you go on from there. Every new investor, every new round is just, you're resetting the goalpost that much further out, and to get to a successful outcome that is going to make your investors happy and you happy, and is going to be an outcome people want. You've just made it, set the bar that much higher for yourself.
Well, and you bring up a point that I think is, when you were asking about working with contract development and things like that, at the end of the day, you want to manage your cap table really well. And that's where I think people sometimes get into trouble with outsourcing their technology, is they say, oh, well, I found somebody who'll do it for me for equity, but that person or that firm isn't set up to do equity. So they end up taking a bigger chunk of equity, and then maybe it doesn't work out, or you have to hire internally. And now you've got a cap table where 30% of the equity is already gone because you've made an early decision just to get something built. It's better to go out and pay a small amount of money to get something that's not going to be your final product, but hold on to that equity a little bit, and keep your cap table manageable, so that when the goalposts do get reset and a Series A investor or Series B investor wants to clean things up, or they want to come in and diligence a deal, they don't see something right off the bat that says, nope, I'm not digging any deeper. My former colleague, Sean Broderick, who had a good way of looking at this, which is, a lot of investors are starting from a place of wanting to say no. And the deals that get done are the deals where they eventually get to a place where they say, well, I guess I have to say yes, because I asked you my gotcha question and you answered it. And then I asked you my next one and my next one and my next one, and I'm out of gotcha questions. So I guess I have to write a check here. And so if you think about it, even though it feels counterintuitive, it's actually a way that people do make decisions. And so going through that process of keeping things clean, making sure that you're ready for that goalpost resetting along the way, and just building that into your plan is really going to help you, not just today, but down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've been talking a lot about, the funding matching up at different stages, and obviously the early stage with the accelerator. I know that you introduced yourself as a reformed or reforming VC. I am curious about the balance of there's a lot of different ways to do things, from bootstrapping to raising a shitload of money and everywhere in between. There's a number of new models that have been innovated, I don't know, startup studios and some of the maybe a little more founder friendly funding that Bryce was working on, and some of the different structures, revenue-based financing, that kind of thing.
That made me very sad when Indy put up that post.
I know.
because it just goes to show that it's not just investors being innovative and thoughtful about things, it's also the LPs that get used to their return structure that they have become accustomed to. And if a different model changes that, unfortunately, like I said earlier, everybody answers to somebody.
Everybody answers to somebody, yeah. Well, so what's your what's your interest now, both personally, and I don't know if you were doing it all again as a founder, would you go down the venture path, or would you do something differently? What's your thinking around that?
So there are a couple of things. I think if you've got the network or you've done it in the past, and you can walk into Andreessen and they'll write you a $10 million check before you've even built something, by all means do that, no doubt.
Yeah.
But that's a very small subset of people, right? And for the others, I think trying to bootstrap as long as you can makes a lot of sense, because you have leverage in that case. And the earlier that you get on to the fundraising hamster wheel, the more you start running at top speed, and you've got investors that are pushing you to grow, and you've got expectations of future rounds and valuations going up and up and up. And it can be exhausting. It can be the wrong decision for a company. And one of the things that I always like to ask people when we were getting down to brass tacks, people that we were really interested in investing with, in investing in, is what's the company you want to build? Wave the magic wand. What does this company look like 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 7 years, 10 years down the road? Is it, the next Google? Or do you want a $10 million business in annual turnover that gives you a great lifestyle, that employs a handful of people, and that powers all your other passions and isn't the center of your universe? Because if that's the case, that's great. I mean, those are great businesses. There are tons of great lifestyle businesses, but they're not venture fundable. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go out and get funding from some of these alternatives. And I think angels are a good option if you can get to those networks. Angel groups tend to be a little more challenging. I won't go into much detail there, but I think the angel groups use their leverage to act more like venture firms, even though they may be coming in for smaller checks. But family offices are actually great, which is to help people if they don't know, a family office is generally a high net worth family that has some sort of dedicated investment arm. And the nice thing about those is that they tend to have a longer time horizon. Instead of needing you to just grow and exit within 7 to 10 years, they might look at something and say, this is important to us. We care about this space. If it takes you 20 years to get to some liquidity event, we don't care. We believe in it. And that's sort of how an individual angel can behave. But family offices typically have much deeper pockets.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, lots of good advice there. Where is your path headed these days? What's in store for you?
Question. That's a good question. So I'm doing some consulting work now. As I've described to people, I tried to be underemployed by design this summer because I was excited to get out and do a little travel. I went to North Carolina, I went to Nantucket, I went to Maine, went to New Hampshire, went to DC.
Nice.
So it's been fun to be able to do a little bit of travel. Of course, my planning for that was before Delta variant really became an issue. But I think like a lot of people, I'm in that place where the last year and a half has made me wonder what it is that matters to me. Is it about chasing the brass ring, or is it about, finding something that's got less visibility and less email that I have to answer at all hours of the day. And so I don't have a good answer for you. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm exploring now. And I feel very, very lucky to be able to do that for a little bit. But it's, I think we're all in a place after this experience with COVID that I think a lot of people are looking inwards and saying, what is it that matters to me? If I was gone tomorrow, would I be happy doing what I've been doing? Or is there something that's going to fulfill me much more and bring me joy and happiness in ways that, what I've been doing hasn't? And I don't know that I won't continue to be in the venture space or even co-found something again, although I think my appetite for that is certainly a little bit less than it was 10 or 12 years ago. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm hoping to come visit and sit out in the woods with you there. That's what I
know.
need
Well,
to
we would love to have you. It's funny, we are packing up and heading out today. We're going up to Canada to see Anne's family for a week, and then we'll be in North Carolina ourselves.
Very nice.
And through September, and so I'm looking forward to a little beach time, working from North Carolina for a month. We've made the decision to take the next 2 years, since Harper won't be in. We've got 2 years before she's in kindergarten, and continue the flexible lifestyle, and then we'll lock it in at some point.
Well, that's great, because that to me is getting at the heart of all of this, which is you're never going to go, boy, I wish I hadn't spent so much time with my family and with my daughter and my wife.
Right.
That's the stuff that's important. And the lessons of the last year and a half are that there's a lot of noise out there. So if you can focus in on what matters to you, that's where you're going to have the most success.
Yeah, totally. Well, good. Well, Peter, I'm gonna wrap the broadcast here at this point.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you so much for being on and joining us today. That was a super fun conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
You're welcome. All right, I think that